The sun was setting over the manicured lawns of Oak Ridge, Virginia, casting long amber shadows across the white linen tables of my daughter's 35th birthday party. I had spent 6 months and nearly $80,000 ensuring every detail was perfect. The string quartet played Vivaldi, the champagne was a vintage that most people only see in movies, and the guest list was a who's who of Northern Virginia's elite. I wanted Sarah to feel like the queen I always believed she was. I stood by the edge of the terrace, clutching a small velvet box. Inside was a family heirloom, a diamond brooch that had belonged to my late wife Martha. It was the piece Sarah had always admired as a child, the one she said made her feel like a princess. I thought today was the day she would finally understand the weight of legacy. Beside Sarah stood Julian, her husband. He was a man with a smile that never quite reached his eyes, a consultant whose primary job seemed to be spending my money and whispering poison into my daughter's ear. He saw me approaching and leaned in, saying something to Sarah that made her jaw tighten. "Sarah, sweetheart," I said, my voice trembling as I opened the box. "I have something for you. Your mother wanted you to have this when the time was right." The diamonds caught the dying sunlight, throwing sparks of fire across her face. But Sarah didn't look at the gems. She looked at me with a cold, jagged hatred that I had never seen before. "Dad, what are you doing?" she whispered, though her voice carried across the silent circle of her high society friends. "I just wanted to give you this," I said, my heart sinking. "Wes, it's been in our family for 80 years. She didn't even touch the box. "Family? You mean the family you think you can buy with your old money and your constant hovering? You're not here for me, Dad. You're here to remind everyone that you're the patriarch." "Well, newsflash, we're tired of it. I'm tired of you. You're a greedy old fool, Dad. Why can't you just go away and never come back?" Before we go deeper into this story, take a second and hit that subscribe button, give this video a like, and let us know where you're watching from. I stood there, the velvet box heavy in my hand, as my only child turned her back on me. The whispers of the guests began, like the buzzing of locusts in the summer heat. I realized then that my presence wasn't a gift. To her, it was a debt she no longer wanted to pay, and Julian was the one holding the ledger. I drove back to my estate, the Hawthorns, in a state of shock. The house, a sprawling colonial I had built with Martha 40 years ago, felt cavernous and mocking. I walked through the foyer, my footsteps echoing on the Italian marble. Every portrait on the wall seemed to judge me for my failure as a father. I sat in my study, the diamond brooch sitting on the mahogany desk. I thought back to our life in suburban Connecticut before the real estate empire took off. We weren't wealthy then. We were happy. When Martha passed away 15 years ago, I thought the only way to protect Sarah was to build a fortress of gold around her. I doubled my efforts, working 18-hour days to ensure she never felt a void. But I had traded presents for presents. I remembered the night Sarah was born, and we were in a cramped hospital room, and Martha looked at me with tears in her eyes, saying, "Arthur, promise me we won't let the world change her." I had kept half that promise. I had kept the world away from her, but in doing so, I hadn't prepared her for the people who inhabit it. People like Julian. Julian, a man who grew up with nothing but an insatiable hunger for more, had recognized that. He had spent the last 5 years convincing Sarah that my generosity was actually a leash. He had whispered to her that I was greedy for keeping the majority of the estate in a trust I controlled, rather than handing him the keys to the kingdom. I looked at the phone. No call from her, no apology. I saw a post on her social media 10 minutes later, a photo of her and Julian laughing, captioned, "Finally free of the old weight, new beginnings." I realized that if I stayed, I would just be the target of their resentment. If I was the greedy old fool, then it was time to show them what life looked like when the fool took his greed and disappeared. I called Elias Thorne, my attorney, at 4 a.m. "Elias," I said, my voice steady despite the hole in my chest. "Cut the lines, all of them. Every discretionary account, every credit card guarantee, every maintenance contract for the Oak Ridge house. I want the trust frozen until further notice. If she wants a new beginning, let her start from scratch." The next morning, I packed a single suitcase and drove 5 hours west into the heart of the Blue Ridge Mountains. I had a small cabin there, 40 acres of rugged land Martha and I had bought years ago. There was no high-speed internet, no marble floors, and the nearest neighbor was miles down a dirt road. For the first few months, the silence was my only companion. I learned to chop wood until my hands bled and then calloused. I learned to cook over a cast iron stove. I watched the seasons change from a vibrant, bleeding autumn into a bone-chilling winter. I realized that for the first time in my life, I wasn't building for the future. I was finally living in the present. I would sit on the porch at night, listening to the coyotes howl, and think about the irony of it all. Sarah thought I was greedy for money, but I was only ever greedy for her time. In my absence, I began to see the errors I had made. I had raised a woman who didn't know the value of a dollar because she had never seen the sweat that went into earning one. Before we continue, so take a second and share your thoughts so far on this story below. I read every single one. Do you think a parent should ever truly walk away after being insulted like that? Or was Sarah right to demand her independence, even in such a cruel way? The mountain winter was harsher than anything I'd felt in my climate-controlled mansion. The wind would howl through the cracks in the cabin walls, sounding remarkably like Sarah's voice that night at the party. Greedy old fool. I spent hours staring into the embers of the fireplace, reliving every mistake I'd made. I remembered Martha's last days. She'd told me, "Arthur, don't let the money become the only language you speak with her." I hadn't listened. I thought money was safety. I thought a trust fund was a shield against the world's cruelty. But I'd inadvertently built a prison for her character. While I was freezing in the mountains, the heat was turning up in Oak Ridge. Without the Vance family allowance, Julian's true nature began to leak out. He had signed leases for luxury SUVs and memberships at 3 different country clubs, all predicated on my quarterly top-offs. When the bank accounts didn't replenish, the repossession notices began to arrive. Elias called me on the satellite phone. "Arthur, she's frantic. She tried to sell the guest house furniture to a dealer in Richmond. She's telling people you've had a mental breakdown and she's looking for you. She's not looking for you to apologize, Arthur. She's looking for the power of attorney." "Let her look," I said. "The greedy old fool is dead to her. Let her see what a life without that fool looks like." I spent my days hunting for my own food and repairing the roof. The physical labor was a cleansing fire. I realized that Sarah and Julian were currently living in a house of cards, and the wind was starting to blow. One evening, I sat by my fireplace reading a book by lamplight, when the phone, the one I kept for emergencies, buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. "Grandpa, it's Leo. Mom says you're traveling, but I miss you. Why didn't you come to my soccer game? Dad is always yelling now. He said we might have to move to a smaller place, and I won't be able to go to my soccer camp next year. Mom cries in the kitchen when she thinks I'm not looking. Did I do something wrong?" I sat on the porch of the cabin, the phone trembling in my hand. The wind whistled through the pines, one carrying the first scent of winter snow. I had wanted to teach Sarah a lesson, but I hadn't accounted for the collateral damage. My grandchildren were being raised in a house of fear, fed a narrative that their grandfather had abandoned them. I didn't respond, not because I didn't want to, but because I knew that any intervention from me would be used by Julian to manipulate Sarah back into his clutches. He would frame my help as another leash. I had to let the truth come from the wreckage, not from my checkbook. If you were in Arthur's shoes, facing a text like this from a grandchild while your own daughter had spat in your face, what would you do? Share your thoughts in the comments. I drove back to Richmond in secret and met Elias in a sterile basement office. "I want a full forensic audit of Julian's consulting firm," I said. "I suspect he's been doing more than just spending my money. A man that desperate always takes shortcuts." Elias worked through the night, his eyes bloodshot behind his glasses. What we found was worse than I imagined. Julian had been reckless. In his desperation to maintain his lifestyle, he had forged my signature on a series of guarantor documents to secure a $3 million loan for a failing real estate venture in Florida. He thought I'd never find out, or that if I did, I'd be too embarrassed to prosecute my own son-in-law. "He's been siphoning the children's college savings accounts too," Elias whispered, showing me the ledger transfers. "He moved them into a shell account in his brother's name. He was planning to run, Arthur. He knew the walls were closing in. He's not running anywhere, I said, my voice hardening like tempered steel. I want the bank to proceed with the foreclosure on the Oak Ridge house. I want them to hit rock bottom. I want Sarah to see the man she chose over her father for who he really is. And I want the FBI on standby. The day of the eviction was a cold, rainy Tuesday in December. I pulled up to the Oak Ridge property in a nondescript black SUV. The lawn, once the pride of the neighborhood, was brown and neglected. A notice of eviction was taped to the front door, flapping in the wind. I walked up the front steps. The string quartet from the birthday party was long gone. In their place was the sound of Julian screaming inside. "I told you to call him, Sarah. He's your father. He's not going to let his own grandkids sit on the curb." "I can't." Sarah's voice was ragged, broken. "After what I said?" "I have some pride left, Julian." "Pride doesn't pay the bill," Julian roared. I heard the sound of glass breaking. A vase, likely a wedding gift, shattered against the floor. I knocked on the door. When Julian opened it, he looked 20 years older. His expensive suit was wrinkled, and he smelled of cheap scotch. When he saw me, his face transformed into a mask of pathetic, greasy relief. "Arthur, thank God, you're back. Look, we've had a bit of a misunderstanding with the bank, but I knew you'd come through for us. We just need a short-term bridge loan." I pushed past him into the foyer. Sarah was standing by the stairs clutching a pile of Leo's clothes. She looked at me, and for the first time, I saw her truly see me. "The bank didn't send a representative today, Julian," I said. "I did, because I own the note on this house. I know I bought the debt through a shell company, and I'm here to tell you that your time is up." Julian's relief vanished, replaced by a sneer. "You own it. So what? You're going to kick us out? On Christmas week? You really are a greedy old fool, aren't you? You'd rather see your grandkids in a shelter than admit you're a control freak." I didn't look at him. I looked at Sarah. "I've spent 40 years building a legacy for you, Sarah, and in 5 years this man has dismantled it. He didn't just spend my money, he spent your character." I threw a folder on the marble table. "In there is the evidence of your husband's fraud, the forged signatures, the embezzled funds from the kids' college accounts, and the secret apartment he's been keeping in the city for his business meetings. He wasn't trying to save the family, Sarah. He was preparing to leave you the moment the well ran dry. He has a flight booked to Panama for tomorrow morning." Sarah dropped the clothes. She walked over to the table and began to flip through the pages. Her face went from pale to ghostly white. Julian tried to grab the folder, but I stepped in his way. "If you touch her or this folder, I call the police," I said. "The only reason you aren't in handcuffs right now is because my grandson missed his Saturday pancakes. I'm giving you 10 minutes to pack a bag and get out of this house. If you ever contact my daughter or my grandchildren again, I will ensure you spend the next 20 years in a federal penitentiary." Julian looked at Sarah, looking for an ally, but she was looking at the evidence of his betrayal. Without a word, he turned and ran toward the back door, leaving his wife and children behind to face the ruins he had created. He didn't even stop to say goodbye to Leo. The house was silent. The rain tapped against the windows. Sarah sank onto the bottom step of the staircase and put her head in her hands. "He's gone," she whispered. "He was never really here, Sarah," I said, sitting down beside her. I felt the age in my bones, but I also felt a strange sense of peace. "You were right," she said, her voice muffled by her tears. "I said those things because I wanted to believe he was the good guy. I wanted to believe I didn't need you, because needing you felt like failing. I'm so sorry, Dad. I'm so sorry." "I'm sorry too," I said. "I thought money was a shield. I didn't realize it was a wall." I didn't give her the house back. Not then. I moved her and the kids into a comfortable, modest 2-bedroom apartment in Alexandria. I paid the first 3 months of rent, but I made her get a job. She started as a receptionist in a property management firm. For the first time, she had to handle real problems. She dealt with angry tenants, leaking pipes, and budgets that didn't balance. She had to learn how to cook cheap meals and how to fix a leaking faucet. I watched from a distance as she slowly, painfully, became a woman I could be proud of. She worked 40 hours a week and then came home to help the kids with their homework. The queen had become a mother. One night she called me crying, not from sadness, but from exhaustion. "Dad," she said, I just realized, this is how you started, isn't it? Working until your hands hurt just to make sure I had a bed? Yes, honey, I said. Oh, that's exactly how it started. 6 months into her new life, Julian made a mistake. He thought Sarah was still the weak, pampered girl he could manipulate. He showed up at her apartment late one night, looking disheveled and desperate. "Sarah, babe," he whispered through the door. "I've changed. I've got a plan. We can get it all back. I just need you to sign a few things. Your father's trust is still there, isn't it? We can be a family again." Sarah didn't open the door. She didn't call me. She called the police. She had recorded the entire conversation on her phone. She stood by the window and watched as they led him away in handcuffs. She didn't feel pity. She felt a profound sense of closure. She had finally learned to protect her own legacy. She called me afterward. "He's gone for good now, Dad. And I handled it." "I know you did," I replied. "I'm proud of you." A year later, on her 36th birthday, there was no string quartet. There were no socialites. There was just me, Sarah, Leo, and his sister in my small cabin in the mountains. We grilled burgers and sat around the fire. Sarah pulled a small velvet box from her purse. She handed it to me. "I found this in Julian's things before he left. He had hidden it, planning to sell it. I've been keeping it safe." I opened the box. The diamond brooch sparkled in the firelight. "I don't want to wear it yet," Sarah said. "I haven't earned it, but I want you to keep it for me, until I'm the woman my mother would have wanted me to be." I looked at my daughter. Her hands weren't soft anymore. They had the same calluses I had earned in the mountains. Her eyes weren't cold, and they were filled with a quiet, fierce pride. She was standing on her own 2 feet, and for the first time, she was truly happy. "You're already that woman, Sarah," I said, pinning the brooch to her sweater. "I was the greedy old fool who lost everything, only to realize that the only thing worth owning was the love of the people who call you Dad." I eventually sold the Oak Ridge house and put the money into a trust for the kids. But Sarah doesn't know that yet. She's too busy building her own life. And as for Julian, he's serving 10 years for fraud and embezzlement. We decided to turn the Hawthorns into a foundation for single parents who were trying to rebuild their lives. Sarah is the director. She doesn't take a salary from the trust. She still works her job in Alexandria. She says she needs the reminder of what it's like to work for a living. I sit on the porch of my cabin now, watching the seasons change. I'm not building empires anymore. I'm building a garden. I'm building memories with my grandchildren. I realize that my greed was never the problem. It was my fear of being alone. But now I've never felt more surrounded. Legacy isn't about what you leave behind in a bank account. It's about the strength of the people you leave behind to carry your name. And the Vance name has never been stronger. Thank you so much for joining us on Family Secrets and Revenge. This story is a powerful reminder that sometimes the most painful words we speak can lead to the most necessary changes in our lives. If this story touched you, please give us a like, subscribe to my channel, and share your overall thoughts based on my story. Have you ever had to walk away from someone you loved to save them? We want to hear your story in the comments. Until next time, take care of your family and your secrets. To truly understand the depth of Julian's betrayal, we have to look at the months leading up to the birthday party. Julian wasn't just spending, he was calculating. He had convinced Sarah that I was slipping, that my mind was going, and that I was becoming paranoid. He used my grief for Martha as a weapon, telling Sarah that I was obsessed with the past and unable to handle the future. He had even gone so far as to hire a fake financial advisor to meet with Sarah, showing her forged documents that suggested I was planning to disinherit her and leave everything to a charity. He created a climate of fear where Sarah felt her only protection was Julian. This is why her outburst at the party was so visceral. She wasn't just angry, she was terrified. She thought I was trying to ruin her life, when in reality, I was the only one trying to save it. When she finally saw the audit, she didn't just see numbers. She saw the architecture of a psychological prison Julian had built around her. In the mountains, I learned that nature doesn't care about your net worth. If you don't chop wood, you freeze. If you don't find water, you thirst. There is a brutal honesty to the wilderness that stripped away my ego. I remembered a day in mid-January when the snow was 4 feet deep and I was trying to fix a leak in the roof. My hands were blue and I was exhausted. I thought about calling Elias and telling him to send a crew. When I thought about going back to the mansion, but then I looked at a photo of Sarah as a little girl that I kept in my pocket. I realized that if I couldn't survive this, I couldn't help her survive what was coming. That leak in the roof became my mission. Fixing it felt more important than any million-dollar deal I had ever closed. It was the first thing I had truly built with my own hands in 40 years. That cabin saved my soul, and it gave me the strength to be the father Sarah actually needed, the one who could say no so that she could eventually say yes to herself. As I look at Leo and his sister playing in the woods, I see the cycle of entitlement finally broken. Leo knows how to fish. He knows how to build a fire. He knows that his grandfather loves him, not because of the toys I buy, but because of the stories I tell. Sarah is dating again, a man who works as a high school teacher. He doesn't care about the estate. He likes Sarah because she's tough, smart, and doesn't take any nonsense. They come up to the cabin every other weekend. Julian's brother tried to sue for a portion of the hidden funds Julian claimed were in the trust, but Elias dismantled him in court in less than an hour. The Vance legacy is no longer a target. It's a fortress. "You greedy old fool." Those words used to haunt me. Now I see them as the best gift Sarah ever gave me. They were the alarm clock that woke me up from a 40-year sleep. They forced me to stop being a bank and start being a man. To anyone out there struggling with a family member who seems lost to greed or manipulation, sometimes the most loving thing you can do is let them fall. If you're always there to catch them, they'll never learn how to stand. Thank you for listening to my story. This has been Family Secrets and Revenge. Don't forget to check out our other stories on the channel, and remember, the truth always has a way of coming home.